This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello, Happy New Year to you, and welcome back to Roots and All, where we're kicking off as we mean to go on with the legend of the horticultural industry. Returning guest John Little is on a collaborative mission to revolutionise the way we care for green spaces in order to ensure they deliver for people and for wildlife. John has set up a new initiative called Care Not Capital, which is about investing in gardeners and recognising them as the key piece they are in the green spaces jigsaw. John starts by filling us in on what he's been up to in the last few years since his inaugural Roots and All appearance.
A lot of the stuff that I said on the first podcast, I suppose I'm still saying now, because a lot of it hasn't changed very much. I mean, I think I was talking about how important it was to invest in looking after places, especially poorer places, in social housing, how we should invest in humankind rather than in materials. I was talking about that at the last podcast, and I've continued to talk about it, as you know. And then I got to a point, I guess about a year ago, where I just thought it would be good to do something in whatever small way we could, to physically do something that might move that conversation along a bit. You know, that's when we decided to set up Care Not Capital, really, just because I had a good feeling that I could raise some money, because we had a bit of momentum here. People were interested in what we were doing here, so people were happy to pay to come here. So that gave me a little starting point with funding. The 2 open days and the weekend I had here raised about £9,000. So that kind of gave us a little bit of money. And then we thought we'd set this thing up, and then we could start to look at where's the best place to spend that money, which is a tricky thing, because it's quite hard to train an amount of people. Like, we've had so many people sign up, but we're only going to be able to train quite a tiny proportion of those people, because you just can't roll out more than sort of 15, 20 people at a time at workshops, can you? You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense. And if we're going to offer a range of skills to people, that's going to be a 5 or 6 days training, we're thinking. So we're at the stage now where we can definitely do the training, and we've definitely got a lot of people signed up. But what we need to do, the next thing really, is to look at how we can raise more money to roll this idea out regionally. And wonderfully, we've had loads of people contact to say, why don't you use our place? Why don't you come to this part of the country? Blah, blah, blah. So that's the next. I'm just leaping ahead now. Sorry, Sarah. So the next thing in my head, but the bottleneck is going to be how we train as many people as we can, you know.
So is that the purpose of the organisation? It's going to be a training provider?
It's a training provider to start with. And then the idea is, if you come on the training, because we've had so many people, we want to obviously make sure the people that come on the training are going to be the people that are going to get the most out of it. And they're also the people that we are suggesting will sign up to our register of gardeners, as it were. And once we've got these really creative, enthusiastic communicators, as it were, in our system, then we're going to reach out to community gardens, to public space providers, and say, would you like a gardener? And you'll get a really good gardener to come and to share all the ideas they have in their head. We don't want to send gardeners out because we don't have the money to send them out gardeners. We don't have to send gardeners out to dig holes. We want to send gardeners out to just regurgitate and share all that knowledge and enthusiasm with public space people. So it's a training thing, and then it's a provider. Then we've started to talk, because of the level of enthusiasm for this idea, we've started to think about a slightly bigger regards to budgets. And we're going to start to look for funders to maybe fund a full-time gardener on a social housing estate, or on maybe 2 or 3 social housing estates, split between them, get a budget for a year for a good gardener to do that, and then offer them to the council, hopefully, and say, look, here's a brilliant gardener. We're going to pay for him. And that gardener can do all the important things. That gardener doesn't have to do the mowing and the hedge trimming and because you've got a maintenance team that does that. That gardener is just going to do the things that we think are the most important. In other words, the skills that are, hopefully, they've got in their head. So that would be a real joy. So we're going to start to put some budgets out there soon and see if we can pull in anyone who wants to say, yeah, I'll fund a gardener for a year on a social housing estate. So that's where we're at, I think, now. But this is way ahead. You know, we haven't even trained anyone yet. So we're doing all the easy stuff now. This is really easy to talk about it. It's been fairly easy to raise the money. The logistics of delivering it obviously are the real job. And that's what we're trying to sort out now. Who are we going to train? What sort of training do we think is going to be the best? You know, we've got 5 or 6 days. How can we make the best of the 5 or 6 days? Who's the best people to train the gardeners, you know?
Mm. And so will it be UK wide or will it start regionally to begin with?
It's going to start definitely here and within the London and South East, simply because that's kind of doable for me very easily. And that means we can iron out any mess ups on it or any glaring missed opportunities or any glaring training that when people come, they say, well, I'd really like to have been trained in this. That makes sense. So we're going to do that here for the first spring, summer, I guess, because also all of us involved in it have got lots of other jobs and lots of other things to do. So if we're not careful, it is going to kind of overtake us slightly if we're not sensible about it. So definitely we're going to start off here. So we're going to contact, and the other thing that we want to do, which I really, really want to do, is kind of my pet thing a bit, is to offer these services, offer to see if councils want to send any of their ground staff to opt into this training for free. So that it means the council doesn't have the cost of the training, so that it's easier for them to have a go at that. And it also means that we can put, hopefully, ground staff from different councils together in one place and have a good few days, and they can then talk to each other. For instance, I don't know whether there's a London-wide sort of setup where all the council ground staff get together and share ideas. I'm guessing there isn't, but that feels to me like such a nice idea anyway, if we can make that happen. So we're going to have a separate training. It might not be 5 days. I think they probably couldn't spare their staff for that long, but maybe 2 or 3 days, specifically for council employees and specifically to say to councils, what would you like your staff to be trained in? What do you think would be useful for you? So we're going to hopefully have an event somewhere, we're not sure where yet, where we invite councils to come and tell us what they want. Tell us what sort of training they'd like, tell us what they'd like us to do, and we will hopefully be able to do that. So they're the 2 things that we're weighing up: free training to professional gardeners and free training for councils. And then to supplement that and to kind of prop that up, then we're going to offer paid training days for the people who feel like they can pay.
Brilliant. So you're assuming people will come to the training with some gardening skills, I guess?
No, we are. We want professional gardeners. We want gardeners, hopefully, that are in places where they obviously can go back and have an influence. So we're not really talking about people that are just starting up in gardening, or it's, you know, we're looking for gardeners that are good gardeners in their own right, I guess, and want to add some skills to that set. And then hopefully they'll take that back and give a nudge to who they're working for, or give a nudge to their clients. We're looking for professional gardeners that obviously have enthusiasm for what we're all talking about. And in some respects, we're looking for gardeners that are good communicators as well, because we're saying that the conversations they have with people while they're working and the conversations they have with their clients and their bosses or wherever else it is, that is actually the important thing that we want to invest in, because horticultural training is kind of taken care of. There's lots of good horticultural training around, so we don't have to think about that. We're much more interested in sending ideas out in the heads of gardeners that they can then unload onto where they're working. I guess that's where we're focused, because obviously once you start something like this, you then realize how many amazing places are doing really good training already. So one is we didn't want to cut across people too much. And 2 is we saw if we focused on that thing, that's probably not being done specifically at the moment, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting you said about the communicators. So assuming that part of it is going to be, how do you get the message out to the people, like you say, that visit the garden, the people that employ you? So that's going to be part of the training. I don't expect you to give too many trade secrets away, but what else might the course encompass?
Oh, yeah, I'm more than happy. We're not quite 100% sure. We're pulling in, hopefully, some really good community people. So some people that have been involved in very successful community gardens, some people that have really made those green spaces work, and more importantly, have made those spaces work over the long term. So we're going to be contacting those people and asking them whether they'd like to get involved in training. I'm very keen to have an element of policy and biodiversity net gain, for instance, embedded in this training, because I think a lot of professional guards are going to come across this in some way or other in their career. And it would be great if they had a bit of background or could suggest, look, to deliver this BNG, why don't you think about this? Or I know this site well, this would be a really good thing to do, or something like that. So we've already chatted to some people like Peter Massini, for instance, who's an amazing guy, been involved in policy and green space infrastructure and knows BNG inside out. We've already given him a nudge and he's happy to train. So he's definitely going to be in the mix. So we're looking at policy, we're looking at good community people to come down, and how do you get people in? How do you make people happy when they come to your community space? How do you keep volunteers? How do you make it a good experience for volunteers? How do you raise money? How do you continue to raise money? More importantly, there's some incredible people out there with fantastic energy that's managed to make this happen. And I think we need to give those people to gardeners and say, look, here you go. This person knows what they're doing. So community, policy, I think I'd like to do a bit on straightforward little bits of wooden construction that might come in. So again, stuff that might not be covered under horticulture. So how do you build a simple timber frame building with a green roof on, for instance? We can't go into massive depth, but just to give people a feel of how straightforward it is actually, and the possibilities of doing that. And obviously, most importantly, looking at how we embed habitat into that little structure that you've built. How do we get habitat into the walls, on the walls? How do we make a good green roof? Because the information, if you kind of Google green roofs, a lot of the time you're going to get manufacturers of green roofs, companies that supply their own product, which is obviously fair and good, but they're going to obviously be focusing on that. We're going to suggest to make a really good green roof, you've got to make it really strong, and you can use all sorts of materials and substrates to make it. In other words, we're going to talk about everything that a standard green roof supplier wouldn't talk about. So we're going to hopefully get the amazing Duncan up to teach people how to build dry stone walls out of rubble, because that seems to be very popular and a lot of people are interested in it. And it might be useful for gardeners because any bits of work they do, they're probably uncovering rubble in their general day-to-day. If they do anything of any consequence in a garden, how can they make best use of that, I guess? How can they make that look good in the garden? So Duncan's going to come up, and I think we're going to ask him to cover that. And then we're also going to ask him to cover basic bits of how can you reuse paving? What's the knack of doing a decent little bit of paving? I mean, I'm not talking about detailed, massive construction. I'm just talking about those that are useful little tips of, I want a 4 or 5 square meter path that I've just got to do. What's a nice, easy way of doing it? What's a cheap material? How can I reuse what's in the garden? Just those little tips that are so useful that I didn't have when I first started. I just continued to make, mistakes constantly. And I probably needed 3 or 4 little bits of advice and I'd have been fine. Suds is the other big thing, of course. So rain gardens, rain planters, just looking at what happens if people are working in a garden or a public space, having a little look while they're gardening about where the downpipe is, where the water from the building's going, and giving their client a little nudge about, you could just do a little rain planter in there. It's so easy. And you could divert the water in the rain planter and back out the rain planter into the existing drainage that you've already got. Not very risky, very easy, but would take out quite a lot of the water that comes off the roof. And then we also want to, I want to really delve into the suds thing of what's the best substrate? Is that the traditional layering of a rain planter with different the drainage materials and the sand and the different things? Is that the right way to do it? Can we have a poke at that and just see if we could try something else, cheaper materials? Does it work as well? Is it critical if it doesn't work perfectly? Probably not in a rain planter. As long as the water goes in and comes out again and doesn't flood anywhere. If the materials are not perfect, is that a terrible thing? But you are using the stuff that's on site. And I think that's a question, I guess, although we're not going to talk about horticulture very much, we're certainly going to say a few of the horticultural things that are embedded in our mind as gardeners and have always been in my head. Those things of, I'm putting this plant in, I've got to make it as happy as I can. I've got to put it in the right place. It's got to be the right plant. I've got to make it look lush and grow really well. Have you? Have you got to do that? Most plants naturally don't grow in perfect conditions. Most plants grow in a variety of conditions, in fact. I've recently been kind of obsessing about this invertebrate book. I talked about it on one of the reels by Peter Kirby. And he talks about what invertebrates want. And there's a whole bunch of invertebrates that actually choose plants that are under stress to lay their eggs on. They don't want lush plants because it may be that means they're in a very competitive environment where the original host plant is going to get shaded out. I don't know the detail, but there's definitely a good argument for plants being under stress actually being really important from a biodiversity point of view. So it's taking those sort of ideas and sort of just easing them into horticulture slightly. And also, I think if you adopt that attitude, it frees you up slightly as a gardener, and it gives you more possibilities to do more interesting things. You're not kind of tied into that. This must be in the best place. This must be growing really quickly and look really lush. If you can kick that into touch, then there's interesting things around that. Obviously, I go to gardens where that happens and it's amazing and it's beautiful and it's fantastic and it's important. But there is another side. You know, it doesn't have to swallow up horticulture, does it? In any way, it can just be a add-on to horticulture. Maybe that's what we're doing in the training. We're just adding to horticulture, really.
One of the skills I guess people need as communicators is an element of diplomacy, because that gardener might be coming in and working alongside a team that just aren't familiar with that way of working. So all of that is very important. Like, you obviously are giving people the skills to communicate, not just with the public, but within an organisation if there's a bigger one.
That's a really good point, Sarah. And I think that's the thing that we've learned, particularly at Clapton Park, is the absolute worst thing you can do is to turn up as some usually white middle class bloke and say, I know what's best for you here, and listen to me, because I'm, you know, that's absolutely the worst thing you can do for the public and the worst thing you could do for colleagues who are working alongside you. So yeah, big part of what we need to talk about in the training. So yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing I was thinking as well is, if you've got this group of gardeners who you've kind of trained together, would you then consider doing some sort of ongoing support group? I mean, it might just be a WhatsApp, but, you know, presumably a lot of these people will find themselves in similar situations, and you've got that potential to build this big community of like-minded people. It sounds like a really good opportunity.
Yes, that's again something that we've talked about, is that not just dumping people off. If they decide, for instance, to have a little go at building a little timber building in a client's garden or something, and then they get stuck, I mean, the last thing we want to do is to, just leave them. So, yes, definitely. Well, hopefully there'll be a community of hill drop trained people that we can definitely support and definitely be with. I mean, I've got another lot of training that I've been working on for quite a while now that's actually going to come in at a similar time, weirdly. And that's another idea of training tradesmen. So I really like the idea of asking, job-in landscape gardeners, fencers, small builders, all those people that are working within our infrastructure in our urban areas, and saying, would you like to come and get some training in green infrastructure? We're going to make it free, and we're going to make it at a time that suits you. And we understand your job's really hard, and most people in those industries work really hard, but they're usually competing on price only often. So it's a hard job. If we can give you green infrastructure skills, you might be able to add that to your skill set, and then you might be able to charge a bit more. You might be able to obviously inform the client about these things. And this is the other thing about the gardener thing, and it's kind of making the best people in at the base, as it were, giving them all the knowledge and all the enthusiasm to influence, to go up with that, rather than relying or, expecting managers and funders and all those people to come up with all this. Most of the time they never do they? So if we have a builder that turns up at a house extension and says to the client, you know what, you got a kind of sad flat roof on that has been specified. Have you thought about a green roof? This is how much it will cost. This is what it will be. This is what it delivers. So you're embedding all that knowledge and that green infrastructure and stuff in with the people who actually physically deliver it, which is, I think, the key thing. And also you're giving that information to clients and customers that probably wouldn't ask for it. So a lot of the clients wouldn't ask the builder for a green roof, but if he can suggest it, I'd say there's a lot more chance of stuff like that going in. Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of people don't know, think it's going to cost maybe a lot more than they expect. And anyway, that's another thing we're doing. That's come from funding from Waits, the big construction company. They have a philanthropy arm that looks at handing money to this. So hopefully we're going to train some tradesmen in Essex soon.
very well done on achieving what you have already. It's like a massive achievement, and everybody knows now that funding's not easy to come by. So people clearly believe in what you're doing. Thinking about the funding going forward, and you said about it would be lovely in future if you could train somebody and then go and approach an organisation and say, okay, well, we've got this trained person and we've got the funding for them for a year. Do you think that will be easy to achieve, or do you think that's going to be a struggle? And I ask because I do a lot of funding applications, and I know that the funders a lot of the time aren't actually that keen on investing in people, which is absolutely madness as far as I can understand it. But yeah, it does seem quite a challenge.
It is. I suppose, Sarah, that's the catalyst for this whole conversation. Care, not capital, is exactly that. Let's spend money on people and not on capital and physical things. Let's spend money on people's energy. But funders have been notoriously reluctant to do that, haven't they? One is because they're scared of any ongoing commitment, I think, which does feel outdated now. And why can't they do that? And why do councils have to spend every penny at the end of the budget? Why can't they keep some to pay people after the date? Like, I don't know. There's systems in place that I think have been going along for a long time that need really to be looked at. And I'm hoping with the momentum of all this that we're going to get someone big that's going to step up and say, you know what, we're actually, instead of spending 40 million on a new garden, I'm actually going to spend 40 million on just funding gardeners to go out and do good things in green space. What a brilliant way to spend 40 million quid. And imagine what you could do. How many gardeners, how many people communicating good stuff, sharing ideas, doing amazing things would 40 million quid pay for instead of one garden, which is what happens at the moment. So I'm hoping to get a conversation with the lottery and ask them to reconsider their funding and say, look, why don't you really put the emphasis on the ongoing care of places rather than just chucking this big lump sum at a project? Why don't you think about just embedding gardeners into a space instead of changing it radically? You could put gardeners into a space and fund them, and they would subtly change the place, and they would deliver community, and they would deliver communication. All those things that slapping a piece of infrastructure into a space doesn't do, does it?
Yeah.
So that's the basis of everything we're talking about, is that value and justifying value. We're not just saying, oh, pay gardeners, that would be nice. Just pay gardeners to go and fluff around in a garden. We're not saying that. We're saying that money, imagine how good an investment that money is. If you give it to someone who's in a space every day, communicating good stuff every day, sharing ideas with people that they take back to their own place, making this place more beautiful, making the place more biodiverse, adapting it for climate change, suggesting a rain garden, all those things come from people on the ground. So that we are suggesting is absolutely incredible value for money, instead of a scheme that gets put in, that they take a picture of, and then no one looks after it. And it happens so many, everyone, I can imagine people who listen to this podcast must know of these schemes. They're all around us. Go back and look at something 5-10 years down the line after the lottery's dumped 10 million quid on it or 500,000 on it, and go and have a look at the quality of it. Go and have a look at the vitality of it. You know what I mean? The joy of it, and see where that is, because that doesn't persist unless you have someone there, does it? You know?
No, that's so true. Talking of the podcast listeners, I imagine there's quite a few people listening thinking, how can I join up to the wonderful training scheme that you've spoken about? If people do want to get in touch, they want to sign up, they want to fund you, they want to help in some way, how would they do it?
Sign up to the website. That's probably the main thing, which people have wonderfully done. And if you want to contact me direct about anything else that you've got ideas for, or you think there's funding possibilities, then please contact me direct. I've got my email and contact details are on my website, and I'll try and get them put onto the Care Not Capital website as well. And we've got an email address on the Care Not Capital website. So we're very open to any suggestions of how we can make this better. Because at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of gardeners like everyone else that's raised a bit of money and just wants to spend it on gardeners. So we're not a big organization that has any fixed goals, really. We're more than happy to talk about how we could achieve this, and also talk about what people think is the right place for us to spend money. So what we're going to try and do with the funding thing is to set a price. How much does it cost to give free training for one gardener? How much does it cost to employ a gardener on social housing for a year? And then we're also in the market for someone who's got a bigger pot of money to fund us to put a garden into the Chelsea Flower Show, simply because we think it's the right time. This will be 26. It'll be the right time. I think it will be a perfect opportunity to say, let's do a show garden in Main Avenue, but have no garden. Let's have a garden that just has gardeners on display. So we have a garden that just displays 40 gardeners, and those gardeners communicate what's in their head with the Chelsea public. Let's have a show garden that showcases gardeners. And if we can get some funding for that, that's an equivalent to a show garden, that's what we're asking. So huge amount of money, actually, to put a show garden on. If we can have a similar amount of money to that, then we could do all that gardeners thing, be there for a week doing all that. And we could then spend the excess money, as it were, on funding gardeners all around London. So wouldn't that be a great legacy for a show garden, rather than carting it off somewhere? And then, is it going to a place that's going to function and work going forward? Often they're not. Is it going to be looked after when it goes to where it is? Probably not. So wouldn't that be good?
Thank you very much to John for kickstarting this important new initiative and for taking the time to talk about it. If you'd like to get involved, the links you'll need are in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and if you like this episode, I recommend 53 with John Little and 239 with Benny Hawksby. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.